Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever had that moment where things finally became clear for you and instead of feeling relieved, you just felt heavy? Not dramatic, not panicky, just slower than you expected. I've noticed this so many times now, in my own life, first of all, and then in conversations with people who are actually paying attention to themselves. The moment you finally know what needs to be done is almost never the moment things speed up. Most of the time, everything slows down. And when I first noticed this, I remember thinking something was wrong with me because we are taught that clarity is supposed to feel like relief, right? Like once you know, you should feel lighter, more confident, more ready to move. But that's not how it usually works. Before clarity, there's a lot of movement. You're reading things, watching videos, thinking, reflecting, asking questions, consuming information. And yes, that phase can be frustrating. It can feel messy. It can feel like you're stuck. But if we are being honest, there's also something familiar about it. Almost comforting. Because as long as you're confused, you're not fully responsible yet. You can tell yourself you're still figuring things out. You can say you're working on it. You can stay busy without having to really commit to anything that might change your life. Confusion gives you space to breathe. And then clarity shows up. Not in some big cinematic moment. Not with fireworks or certainty about everything. It usually arrives quietly. You're walking somewhere, or sitting alone, or journaling, or just staring at the ceiling. And suddenly you know the next step. Not the whole plan, not the final destination, just the next honest move. And that's when something shifts inside you. Because now you can't unknow it. And this is the part that surprises people. Before clarity, not acting felt neutral. You were still on your way, still processing. But after clarity, not acting feels different. It starts to feel like a choice. Every day you don't move on, what you know carries a little weight. Not loud weight, not anxiety. Just this quiet pressure in the background. Most people aren't prepared for that change. They think the hard part was figuring it out, getting clear. But the real friction shows up after clarity because clarity doesn't hype you up. It doesn't push you, it removes your excuses. And when excuses disappear, you're left alone with something very raw your willingness, and that can be uncomfortable. So people don't quit dramatically. They don't say, I'm done. They just slow down. They tell themselves they need more time, more preparation, better timing. And honestly, on the surface, all of that sounds reasonable. But underneath it, something else is happening. Clarity doesn't just show you what to do, it also shows you what might change if you do it. It shows you how visible you might become, how some relationships might shift, how parts of your identity might no longer fit the same way. It shows you that you might not be able to go back to the old version of yourself. And that's when consequence enters the picture. This part doesn't get talked about enough. Clarity often arrives with responsibility, not pressure. Responsibility. You start to sense how this decision affects more than just you, how it might require you to show up differently, how it might ask for a little more honesty than you've needed before. And when that awareness widens, the system naturally slows down, not because something is wrong, but because more is being held. Low stakes decisions feel easy because there isn't much at risk. High stakes clarity feels heavy because there is. Most people misinterpret that heaviness. They think it means fear or laziness, or that they're not disciplined enough. They tell themselves that if this was really right, it wouldn't feel like this. But often, the opposite is true. That weight is in danger. It's your nervous system realizing that this actually matters. And instead of learning how to stay with that feeling, most people pull away from it. They don't say they're quitting. They start questioning the clarity itself. They revisit it. They overthink it. They wait for it to feel lighter. But clarity doesn't get lighter when you avoid it. It just waits, quietly. And this is where the cost slowly builds. When you repeatedly don't act on something you know is right, it starts to affect how you trust yourself. not your confidence, your self trust. You stop believing that when you know something, you'll honor it. And that's why people can look completely fine on the outside but feel oddly disconnected on the inside months later. Nothing terrible happened, no big failure. They just avoided themselves a few too many times. Why motivation stops working here? Let me tell you something honestly. Something I wish someone had said to me much earlier. When you reach this phase, motivation stops being useful. And I don't mean that in a dramatic or anti motivation way, I mean it very practically. If you're clear about something and still not moving, it's usually not because you're lazy. It's not because you lack discipline or structure. It's because motivation is simply the wrong tool for this moment. Motivation works when you're unsure, when you're exploring, when you're experimenting and trying things out. But once clarity arrives, motivation can actually start to feel irritating, almost insulting, because deep down you already know. And being told to push harder or just do it creates a strange tension inside. It's like someone is yelling at you to run when you're actually standing still for a reason you don't fully understand yet. What's really happening in this phase is much quieter. Your internal system is reorganizing. I know that sounds abstract, so let me ground it a little. When you see something clearly, your inner world has to update around that truth. Your identity, your expectations, your relationship, your sense of who you are and what you're responsible for. That kind of update takes time, not procrastination time, processing time. This is where a lot of people turn against themselves. They start asking, why am I not moving yet? What's wrong with me? Why does this feel so hard if I'm so clear? And that self pressure doesn't help. It actually makes things heavier because now, instead of processing clarity, your system is also defending itself from judgment. So everything tightens. This is usually the moment people try to force action. They tell themselves they need discipline, a stricter routine, more accountability, some external push to get them moving. And sometimes that works, at least for a while. You can push yourself into motion. You can make progress on paper. But it rarely feels right. It feels frantic. It feels forced. It feels slightly disconnected from yourself. Like you're dragging yourself forward instead of moving from something real. And eventually, that leads to burnout or quiet resentment. What's actually needed here isn't force, it's alignment. And alignment doesn't come from pushing, it comes from staying present. There's a big difference between avoiding clarity and staying with it. Avoiding it looks like distraction, overthinking, consuming more information, waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect feeling. Staying with it feels uncomfortable but honest. It's sitting with the weight without immediately trying to get rid of it. It's noticing the hesitation, the seriousness, the sense that something meaningful is being asked of you, and letting that be there. Most of us were never taught how to do this. We were taught that discomfort means something is wrong, that heaviness means danger, that if something feels serious, we should either rush it or escape it. But sometimes heaviness doesn't mean danger. Sometimes it just means importance. Sometimes it means you're standing at a threshold. And thresholds are quiet place. They don't feel exciting. They don't feel motivating. They feel still. This is the phase where your system needs to finish integrating what it already knows. If you rush this phase, you burn out. If you avoid it, you quit. But if you stay with it, something subtle starts to happen. The discomfort begins to soften on its own. Not because you forced yourself to act, not because you hyped yourself up, but because your system finished processing. The urgency drops, the noise settles. The next step becomes obvious in a calm, grounded way. Not dramatic, not heroic. Just clear. And when action comes from that place, it feels very different. It doesn't feel like proving something. It doesn't feel like fixing yourself. It doesn't feel like catching up. It feels clean. This is why some people look calm even when they're making serious moves. Not because they care less, but because they've learned not to panic when clarity brings weight with it. They don't confuse weight with danger. They trust that if they stay present long enough, The sequence will complete itself. They don't rush the moment, they don't run from it either, they let it finish. And that's why they don't quit when clarity shows up, they move when movement actually belongs. If you're in this space right now, I want you to hear this clearly. There is nothing wrong with you. You're not behind, you're not broken, you're not failing some invisible test. You simply reached a point where confusion stopped protecting you and clarity is asking for honesty. That's a vulnerable place to be, and how you respond to it matters. If you judge it, you'll pull away. If you dramatize it, you'll stall. If you stay with it, it organizes itself. You don't need to rush yourself through this. You just need to trust that your system knows how to complete what it started as long as you don't abandon it halfway. There's something important we haven't talked about yet. Most people don't quit at this stage because they're incapable. They quit because clarity makes them visible. And visibility is uncomfortable in a way confusion never was. When you're confused, you can hide a little, you can delay, you can stay undefined. You can tell yourself and others that you're still figuring things out. But once you're clear, even if no one else knows, something changes inside you. There's an inner witness now. You know when you're avoiding something. You know when you're postponing. You know when you're choosing comfort over honesty. That awareness isn't loud or aggressive, it's quiet. But once it's there, it doesn't go away. And from that point on, every time you don't act on what you know, it costs you something subtle. Not externally, internally. It costs you self trust. Self trust doesn't disappear all at once, it erodes slowly. You stop believing that when you know something, you'll honor it. You stop taking your own clarity seriously. That's why people can look completely fine on the outside months later, but feel strangely disconnected on the inside. Nothing dramatic happened, no visible failure. They just postponed themselves too many times. And this is where clarity starts to feel heavier instead of lighter. Not because clarity is the problem, but because avoiding it creates friction inside you. You start doubting yourself more, not less. Not because you're weak, but because you're breaking trust with yourself in small, repeated ways. But there's another layer to this that almost never gets talked about. When clarity shows up, it doesn't just ask you to act. It asks you to let go of something. Usually, it's not a thing. It's a version of you. A version that was allowed to stay undecided. A version that could explain delays with confusion. A version that didn't yet have to stand behind a clear choice. And letting go of that version can feel surprisingly emotional. Not dramatic sadness, just something tender. Because that version protected you. It bought you time, it kept options open, it gave you room to breathe when you weren't ready yet. So when clarity arrives, there can be a subtle sense of grief that people don't expect. You are not just moving towards something new, you're saying goodbye to a way of being that kept you safe. If that isn't acknowledged, your system resists quietly, not because it doesn't want growth, but because it doesn't want to be abandoned without recognition. This is why people often feel reflective after getting clear. Not excited, not relieved, just quiet. It's not doubt, it's transition. Clarity also removes the fantasy layer. Before clarity, you can imagine change without actually changing. You can picture outcomes without having to live through the awkward middle. Clarity collapses that distance. Now it's not about who you could become someday. It's about who you're willing to be next week, in real situations, with real consequences. That's sobering, because real change isn't aesthetic. It shows up in conversations, in boundaries, in choices that don't always look impressive from the outside. This is another reason people slow down here. Not because they don't want the outcome, but because they are coming face to face with the reality of becoming someone slightly different than before. Someone more visible, someone more accountable, someone who can't hide behind potential anymore. If you feel resistance here, that doesn't mean something is wrong. It usually means something real is happening. This is the moment where growth stops being an idea and starts becoming a lived experience. And lived experiences take time to settle into the body. This is why the way through this isn't force, it isn't motivation, it isn't discipline in the way it's usually framed. It's honesty, quiet honesty, honesty about what you know, honesty about what feels heavy, honesty about what you're scared might change if you actually move, not to fix it, not to rush it, just to stop pretending. When you stop pretending that clarity should feel easy, something inside relaxes. You stop fighting the weight. You stop making it mean that something is wrong with you. Slowly, your relationship with yourself begins to repair. You start trusting that when something matters, you won't immediately abandon yourself just to feel comfortable again. That's where real confidence comes from. Not from success, not from results, not from validation, but from knowing that when you see something clearly, you're willing to stay with it long enough for the next step to reveal itself. That's inner stability, not certainty, reliability. It's knowing you won't disappear when things get serious. And once that trust starts rebuilding, action doesn't need to be forced. It shows up naturally, not in dramatic moves, not in big announcements, but in simple, honest movement. A conversation you stop avoiding, a decision you stop postponing, a step you take quietly without needing anyone else to witness it. Those small movements change things more permanently than motivation ever could. This is why some people look calm when they're doing difficult things. Not because they don't feel fear, but because they don't let fear decide for them anymore. They've learned that clarity doesn't arrive to pressure you, it arrives to invite you into a more honest relationship with yourself. So, if you're in that space right now where things are clear but heavier than you expected, hear this carefully. You're not late, you're not failing, you're not broken. You are standing at a moment where confusion stopped protecting you and clarity is asking you to show up without hiding. That moment feels quiet, serious, uncomfortable, but it's meaningful. How you respond to it will shape your relationship with yourself far more than any outcome ever will. If you judge it, you'll retreat. If you dramatize it, you'll freeze. If you stay with it patiently and honestly, it organizes itself. Clarity is in the finish line. It's the point where excuses fall away and self respect begins. Most people quit here not because they can't do what's required, but because they're not yet comfortable being seen by themselves acting on what they already know. This channel exists to talk about these moments as they actually show up in real life, not as hacks, not as techniques, not as motivation. Just honest patterns people move through when something real starts asking more of them. Because when the internal system aligns, action doesn't need force, it becomes inevitable.
This is the Pranjal Jain, waiting for you to meet your alpha self. Stay consistent. Keep upgrading your internal world. If direction needs adjustment, adjust it with awareness, but keep your grip on the destination. Your alpha self is already waiting for you. Step up now.